They were too young to drive, too young to vote, but not too young to kill. In the annals of crime, there exist stories so chilling that they defy belief. Stories of children, some as young as 8 or 9, accused or even convicted of murder. How could someone so young commit such acts? And what does justice look like for a child? Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode, where we're diving into one of the most unsettling and controversial topics in criminal history: the youngest children ever suspected or convicted of murder. We'll explore cases that challenge our understanding of innocence, justice, and the human psyche. Cases where the perpetrators are children themselves. From the infamous case of 10-year-old Mary Bell in the UK to chilling stories of suspected child killers under the age of 10, we'll uncover the facts, the context, and the lasting impact of these tragic events. But be warned, this is not an easy story to hear. What drives a child to commit murder? And how should society respond? Stick around as we unravel the stories, the psychology, and the questions that have haunted communities and experts alike for decades. It was 1968, in the quiet streets of Newcastle upon Tyne, England, when a series of events unfolded that would leave an indelible scar on the city's history. At the center of the tragedy was an 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell, whose name would forever be associated with a chilling story of childhood lost. Today, we're taking a closer look at the shocking case of Mary Bell, the young girl from Newcastle who, at just 10 years old, was convicted of killing 2 young boys. Who was Mary Bell? What led her to commit these acts? And what happened after the dust settled? Let's dive into the details. Mary Flora Bell was born on May 26, 1957, in the working-class Scotswood area of Newcastle upon Tyne, England. Her childhood was far from ordinary. Mary's mother, Betty Bell, was a troubled woman who worked as a sex worker. Reports suggest that Betty was physically and emotionally abusive, even attempting to harm Mary on several occasions. Mary's father, Billy Bell, was a petty criminal who was often absent from her life. Mary grew up in an environment of neglect, violence, and instability, which deeply affected her psychological development. It's believed that these early experiences played a significant role in shaping her actions later in life. The tragic events began on May 25, 1968, one day before Mary's 11th birthday. 4-year-old Martin Brown was found dead in an abandoned house. Initially, his death was ruled accidental, as there were no clear signs of foul play. However, just weeks later, on July 31, 1968, the body of 3-year-old Brian Howe was discovered in a wasteland near his home. This time, the death was unmistakably a homicide. Brian's body showed signs of strangulation, and chillingly, his attacker had mutilated his body with scissors. The question that haunted investigators and the public was, why would a child commit such horrific acts? Psychologists who later evaluated Mary Bell described her as showing psychopathic tendencies, a lack of empathy, and an unnatural fascination with death. It's believed that her troubled upbringing, combined with possible undiagnosed mental health issues, contributed to her actions. Mary's behavior during and after the murders raised suspicions. Following Martin Brown's death, Mary and her friend Norma Bell, no relation, vandalized a nursery, leaving notes confessing to the crime. Police dismissed these notes as a prank at the time. After Brian Howe's death, Mary made incriminating comments to the victim's family and led other children to the crime scene. Witness accounts and inconsistencies in her statements ultimately led to her arrest, along with Norma Bell. Mary Bell's trial began on December 5, 1968. She was charged with the manslaughter of both boys, and her defense argued diminished responsibility due to her young age and mental state. Norma Bell was acquitted, but Mary was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The judge described Mary as a dangerous individual and sentenced her to be detained indefinitely at Her Majesty's pleasure, a common sentence for juvenile offenders in the UK. Mary was initially sent to a secure children's facility before being transferred to an adult prison as she grew older. In 1980, after serving 12 years, she was released from custody at the age of 23 and given a new identity to protect her from public scrutiny. Since her release, Mary Bell has lived a life of anonymity. She became a mother herself and fought legal battles to protect her and her child's identities, a right that continues under British law. Mary Bell's case is a stark reminder of the complexities of justice when it comes to juvenile offenders. It raises difficult questions about nature versus nurture, rehabilitation, and the long-term effects of childhood trauma. While the world may never fully understand what drove Mary Bell to commit these heinous acts, her story remains a pivotal chapter in criminal history. The next story will certainly shock you. It was a crime that shocked the world, a crime that forced an entire nation to confront an uncomfortable truth. In 1993, in the quiet city of Liverpool, England, two 10-year-old boys, John Venables and Robert Thompson, committed a murder so horrific that it changed the way society viewed children and crime forever. Next up, we're exploring one of the most infamous and heartbreaking cases in modern criminal history, the murder of James Bulger. Who were John Venables and Robert Thompson? What led these young boys to commit such an unthinkable act? And what happened after they were caught? Let's examine the details of this tragic case. John Venables and Robert Thompson were both 10 years old at the time of the crime. They came from troubled backgrounds in Liverpool, England. Robert Thompson was the fifth of 7 children in a family plagued by violence, neglect, and alcoholism. His father had abandoned the family, and his mother struggled to care for her children. John Venables, on the other hand, came from a family dealing with its own challenges, including parental separation and behavioral issues. Both boys exhibited signs of emotional instability and behavioral problems in school, often acting out and showing signs of bullying tendencies. These factors would later be examined as part of the explanation for their actions, though they could never fully justify what they did. On February 12, 1993, 2-year-old James Bulger was with his mother at the New Strand shopping center in Bootle, Liverpool. As his mother briefly turned her attention away, James wandered off and was lured away by John Venables and Robert Thompson. Over the course of the day, the boys led James on a tragic journey that would ultimately end in his murder. They walked for over 2 miles, during which multiple people noticed them but didn't intervene, assuming they were older siblings or friends. Eventually, the boys took James to a disused railway track, where they carried out a brutal attack. James was tortured and beaten to death, and his body was left on the tracks in an attempt to stage an accident. The discovery of James Bulger's body horrified the nation. Investigators quickly began reviewing CCTV footage from the shopping center, which revealed the grainy yet unmistakable image of 2 young boys leading James away. This footage was key in identifying John Venables and Robert Thompson. When the boys were questioned, their initial stories were inconsistent. However, evidence such as paint found on James's clothing, which matched a substance on Venables's clothing, and eyewitness accounts led to their arrest and eventual confession. John Venables and Robert Thompson became the youngest individuals in modern British history to be charged with murder. Their trial began in November 1993 and sparked international media attention. The boys were tried in an adult court, and their names and faces were released to the public, a controversial decision that fueled widespread outrage and debate. Both boys were found guilty of murder on November 24, 1993. The judge described their crime as unparalleled evil and barbarity and sentenced them to be detained indefinitely at Her Majesty's pleasure. This is the British equivalent of an indefinite sentence for juvenile offenders, with their release dependent on assessments of rehabilitation. Venables and Thompson were held in secure juvenile detention facilities, where they received education and therapy. In 2001, after serving 8 years, they were released on a lifelong license, meaning they would remain under strict supervision. Both were given new identities to protect them from public retribution. Their release caused outrage, with many believing their sentences were far too lenient. Over the years, John Venables in particular has been in the spotlight due to reoffending, including possession of child pornography, which led to his reincarceration multiple times. The murder of James Bulger remains one of the most significant cases in British legal history. It sparked debates about the treatment of juvenile offenders, the age of criminal responsibility, and the balance between justice and rehabilitation. For James's family, the pain of their loss continues to this day, as they advocate for tougher sentences and justice for victims of violent crimes. This case serves as a haunting reminder of the capacity for violence, even in the youngest among us, and the challenges society faces in addressing such tragedies. This next one will really shock you. On a quiet February morning in 2009, the tranquility of a rural Pennsylvania community was shattered. At the center of the tragedy was an 11-year-old boy, Jordan Brown, accused of a crime that would ignite a national debate about juvenile justice. How could a child so young be charged with such a heinous act? And what really happened that morning? Next up, we're unraveling the story of Jordan Brown, a case that drew widespread attention for its shocking allegations and controversial legal proceedings. Who was Jordan Brown? What led to the tragic events of that day? And what was the outcome of this complex and emotional case? Let's dive into the details. Jordan Brown was an ordinary 11-year-old boy growing up in Wampum, Pennsylvania. He lived with his father, Chris Brown, his soon-to-be stepmother, Kenzie Houck, and her 2 daughters from a previous relationship. Kenzie was also pregnant with Jordan's half-brother, and the family was preparing for the new arrival. By all accounts, Jordan was a typical 5th grader who enjoyed playing sports and video games. However, the idyllic family dynamic would come to a devastating end on the morning of February 20th, 2009. On the morning of February 20th, 2009, police were called to the Brown family home. There, they discovered 26-year-old Kenzie Houck lying in bed, fatally shot in the back of the head. Her unborn child did not survive. The weapon used was a youth-sized shotgun designed for young shooters. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Jordan Brown, who had reportedly been seen with the shotgun earlier that morning. The gun belonged to him, a gift from his father, as Jordan had recently taken an interest in hunting. Police pieced together their theory that Jordan, motivated by jealousy over the new baby and his father's relationship with Kenzie, had shot her before getting on the school bus that morning. Jordan denied the allegations, maintaining his innocence from the start. Despite the lack of physical evidence directly tying Jordan to the crime, no fingerprints or gunshot residue, authorities relied on circumstantial evidence and testimony from Kenzie's 7-year-old daughter, who claimed to have heard a loud bang before seeing Jordan leave the house. Jordan Brown was initially charged as an adult with 2 counts of homicide, sparking outrage and debates about whether such a young child should face adult penalties. After public outcry and legal battles, his case was eventually transferred to juvenile court. The juvenile court proceedings were closed to the public, but the trial focused heavily on the lack of direct evidence. Jordan's defense argued that the prosecution's case was based on assumptions rather than hard facts. In 2012, Jordan was found delinquent, a term used in juvenile court, equivalent to a guilty verdict in adult court, for first-degree murder. He was sentenced to placement in a juvenile detention facility until the age of 21. However, Jordan and his legal team never stopped fighting for his innocence. In 2018, after years of appeals, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Jordan's conviction, citing insufficient evidence. By this time, Jordan had already spent nearly a decade in detention for a crime he maintained he did not commit. Jordan's case became a landmark in discussions about juvenile justice, raising questions about how young offenders are charged and the potential flaws in the system. After his release, Jordan worked to rebuild his life out of the public eye. The case of Jordan Brown remains controversial to this day. Was justice served? Or was an innocent child wrongly accused? Regardless of where you stand, this case highlights the complexity and emotional toll of crimes involving children, both as victims and as suspects. This next story is about the youngest killer we know of. In 2007, the quiet village of Begusarai in Bihar, India, became the setting for a series of horrifying crimes. At the center of these events was Amarjeet Sada, an 8-year-old boy whose actions shocked the world and defied all understanding of childhood innocence. How could a child so young commit such heinous acts? And what led to these unthinkable crimes? Next up, we're exploring the chilling story of Amarjeet Sada, a boy who became one of the youngest serial killers in history. Who was Amarjeet? What led to his actions? And what happened to him after the truth came to light? Let's delve into the details of this haunting case. Amarjeet Sada was born in the small village of Begusarai, Bihar, one of the poorest regions in India. He came from a family of laborers who lived a simple and difficult life. By all accounts, Amarjeet's childhood was marked by poverty and a lack of structure, common in rural areas where access to education and mental health resources is limited. But what set Amarjeet apart from other children was something far darker. By the age of 8, Amarjeet had reportedly killed 3 young children, including members of his own family. His victims were completely defenseless, infants who were unable to resist or even comprehend the danger. Amarjeet's first known victim was his 6-month-old cousin, whom he reportedly strangled in 2006. This was followed by the killing of his 8-month-old sister. In both cases, the family allegedly chose to keep these horrific acts a secret, either out of fear, shame, or disbelief. However, Amarjeet's actions didn't stop there. In 2007, he killed another child, 6-month-old Khushbu, the daughter of a neighbor. This time, the crime could not be concealed. After Khushbu went missing, her body was discovered in a nearby field, showing clear signs of blunt force trauma. When questioned, Amarjeet reportedly confessed to the murder with chilling calmness, even smiling as he recounted his actions. According to reports, Amarjeet admitted to killing all 3 children, including his sister and cousin. He allegedly claimed he felt no remorse, displaying a complete lack of empathy, a hallmark of psychopathic behavior, even at such a young age. Why would a child commit such horrific acts? Experts who studied Amarjeet's case suggested he may have suffered from an undiagnosed mental disorder, possibly psychopathy or conduct disorder. His environment, marked by neglect and poverty, likely exacerbated his violent tendencies. It's important to note that Amarjeet was never formally diagnosed with any specific condition, but his behavior was far from typical. His calm demeanor and lack of remorse suggested deep psychological issues that were never addressed in his formative years. Under Indian law, Amarjeet could not be tried as an adult due to his age. He was taken into custody and placed in a children's home, where he reportedly remained until the age of 18. Details about his life after his release remain scarce due to legal protections for juvenile offenders. India's juvenile justice system focuses on rehabilitation rather than punishment, particularly for offenders as young as Amarjeet. This approach has sparked debates about whether such measures are sufficient for children who commit extreme crimes. Amarjeet Sada's case raised global awareness about child offenders and the challenges of addressing such crimes in underdeveloped areas. It also highlighted the importance of mental health support and early intervention for at-risk children. While Amarjeet's actions are deeply disturbing, his story underscores the urgent need to examine the environments and circumstances that contribute to such behavior. Was he born a killer, or was he a product of his surroundings? It's a question that will continue to haunt those who hear his story. And last but not least, this last one will really blow you away. In the heart of rural Arkansas in 1929, a shocking crime unfolded that left a small community reeling. At the center of it was 12-year-old James Vaughn, a boy accused of committing an unthinkable act. This case, steeped in tragedy and mystery, remains one of the earliest examples of a child charged with murder in the United States. Lastly, we'll uncover the story of James Vaughn, a boy thrust into the national spotlight for a crime that baffled investigators and the public alike. Who was James Vaughn? What led to the tragic events of that fateful day in 1929? And what happened to him afterward? Let's dive into the details. James Vaughn grew up in rural Arkansas during the late 1920s, a time of economic hardship and social conservatism. His family, like many others, lived off the land, scraping by through farming and manual labor. James was described as a quiet, introverted boy who often kept to himself. Though life was difficult, nothing about James's early years suggested he would one day be accused of such a heinous crime. However, his quiet demeanor would soon take on a far darker meaning. In November 1929, the Vaughn family's neighbor, a young girl named Sally Taylor, was found dead in a wooded area near their homes. Sally had been brutally attacked, and the community was horrified by the nature of the crime. What shocked everyone even more was the identity of the suspect, 12-year-old James Vaughn. Investigators claimed they found evidence linking James to the crime, including inconsistent statements and physical evidence that they believed tied him to the scene. The alleged motive behind the crime remains unclear to this day. Some speculated that James acted out of jealousy or a moment of rage, while others argued that he was incapable of such violence and had been wrongly accused. The investigation was fraught with controversy. In an era without modern forensic techniques, much of the case relied on circumstantial evidence and confessions extracted during intense interrogations. Critics would later question whether James fully understood the gravity of his situation or the implications of his statements. James Vaughn's trial began shortly after his arrest, drawing national attention. The public was divided. Some saw him as a cold-blooded killer, while others believed he was a scapegoat in a rush to justice. The trial was highly emotional, with prosecutors painting James as a dangerous individual despite his young age. His defense team argued that he was a child, incapable of fully understanding his actions or the accusations against him. In a shocking turn of events, James Vaughn was found guilty of murder. Due to his age, he was spared the death penalty but was sentenced to life in a juvenile detention facility where he remained until adulthood. James's case sparked outrage and debate across the country, raising questions about the ethics of trying children as adults and the adequacy of the juvenile justice system in handling such cases. The story of James Vaughn remains a haunting example of the complexities of juvenile crime. While the exact details of his life after incarceration are largely unknown, his case set a precedent for how the American legal system approached young offenders in the years to come. Whether James was truly guilty or a victim of a flawed system, his story continues to serve as a stark reminder of the challenges in balancing justice, accountability, and compassion for those too young to fully comprehend their actions. The case of James Vaughn is a tragic tale that leaves us with more questions than answers. It forces us to confront difficult truths about crime, punishment, and childhood. These stories, though separated by time, place, and circumstances, share a chilling commonality. The perpetrators were children. They force us to question the nature of innocence, the influence of environment, and the role of justice when it comes to the youngest members of society. Whether it's the rural villages of India or the bustling streets of England, the chilling truth remains. Children, too, can commit unspeakable acts. But these stories aren't just about the crimes. They're about the systems, communities, and lives forever altered in their wake. They serve as haunting reminders of the complexities of human behavior, the importance of intervention, and the ongoing need for understanding and compassion. What are your thoughts on these cases? Were these children victims of their environments, or did something deeper drive their actions? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking true crime stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and stay safe.